It's day one of the celebrity trial gripping much of the nation. Sean Diddy Combs, once one of entertainment's most powerful moguls, accused of crimes so heinous.
The first witness is now on the stand in the federal sex trafficking trial for Sean Diddy Combs in New York City after final jury selection and opening statements this morning.
Day one, the trial that could dismantle a legacy. It's only the first day of testimony in the federal sex trafficking trial of music mogul Sean Diddy Combs, but already the air in the New York courtroom is electric. After a brisk jury selection and sharply delivered opening statements, the nation finds itself gripped by what promises to be one of the most consequential celebrity trials in recent memory. A warning to viewers: what follows includes direct references to public statements and courtroom reports. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The headlines this morning weren't about Diddy's legal team or even the first witness to take the stand. They were about his mother, Janice Combs. A woman who has long remained in the background, even during the most turbulent chapters of her son's rise and fall. Janice finally broke her silence. And what she said didn't just stir public opinion. It sent a ripple through legal circles, the music industry, and households across the country. Her statement, released just hours before testimony began, at first read like a familiar script: maternal love, emotional exhaustion, a plea for understanding. She decried the federal charges as a public lynching, expressed heartbreak, and asked that the world reserve judgment until the full truth emerged. But buried within her words was a phrase so loaded, so potentially explosive, that it shifted the entire narrative in an instant. "I've seen what the world hasn't, and I warned Sean." That line, stark and unflinching, tore open the floodgates. Within minutes, social media was ablaze. Legal analysts, investigative reporters, and even insiders from Combs' inner circle began asking the same chilling question: what did Janice see, and why is she speaking now? Crucially, her statement did not offer a blanket denial. She didn't claim the allegations were fabrications. She didn't challenge the validity of videos, text messages, or prior testimonies. Instead, she centered her pain not on what her son may have done, but on how the public was choosing to perceive him. It was a subtle but significant shift in tone that didn't go unnoticed. "This isn't a denial," one federal prosecutor told CNN. "It's an emotional pivot, blaming the audience for reacting to the evidence rather than questioning the evidence itself." The backlash was immediate and pointed. Users online didn't mince words. "Warned him about what?" one commenter wrote. "If she knew and said nothing, isn't that complicity?" It's not the first time the Combs family has weathered a media storm. Diddy's past includes everything from club shootings to civil suits, yet Janice had always maintained a firm silence, until now. And to many observers, the timing didn't feel accidental. With video evidence circulating, alleged victims speaking publicly, and new witnesses set to testify, her statement felt less like a defense and more like a calculated attempt to shape the public narrative. The implications are severe. Former associates of the Combs empire have already begun to speculate that Janice may have been aware of troubling behavior dating back decades. At minimum, her words imply foreknowledge, something the prosecution is reportedly exploring in earnest. But there's another layer to all of this: self-preservation. Is Janice Combs trying to shield her son from the weight of legal consequences? Or is she quietly distancing herself, laying the groundwork for her own moral absolution? As the trial unfolds, one thing is certain: that single sentence has changed the tone of everything. It has turned what was once a story about a fallen icon into something much darker: a generational silence, a warning ignored, and a mother's role now under the microscope. The courtroom may be where the verdict is delivered, but the court of public opinion is already in session. And as this saga deepens, all eyes remain on Janice. not just for what she said, but for what she might say next. What did Janice know, the silent mother at the center of a growing storm? She had been quiet for years. No more award shows, no more red carpets, no more proud declarations beside her son, the mogul. Around 2005, Janice Combs faded from the public eye, and few questioned why. But now, as lawsuits pile up and headlines grow darker around Sean Diddy Combs, her absence has become a story of its own. The digging began slowly. Old interviews, paparazzi snapshots, red carpet footage, every frame suddenly under forensic scrutiny. Patterns emerged. Janice stopped appearing at industry events. She wasn't on his arm at galas. Her name vanished from after-party guest lists. Then came a resurfaced clip from a 2007 interview. "He's very extravagant," Janice said, with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He lives fast, too fast for me." When the interviewer asked if she ever worried about her son, Janice paused. Her smile dropped. "I used to," she said. "Now, I just pray." At the time, it seemed like a mother's harmless concern. But now, in the context of disturbing allegations and a growing federal investigation, her words feel different. Less like a sentiment, more like a warning. Sources close to the family say the distance wasn't just physical. "She didn't approve," said a former employee at Bad Boy Entertainment. She never said it directly, but it was written all over her face. She was worried. Deeply. Insiders now wonder if that cryptic phrase, "I warned him," was more than a statement of moral clarity. What if it was a quiet confession? What if Janice saw the cracks forming early on and tried to intervene, only to be silenced, dismissed, or pushed out? Attorneys representing several accusers have already begun exploring that possibility. If Janice had knowledge of misconduct or abusive behavior and failed to report it, she could become a pivotal witness or face legal exposure of her own. Suddenly, the quiet matriarch who once lived in the shadows is finding herself uncomfortably close to the eye of a legal and moral storm. But to truly understand why her voice matters now, we have to rewind to before the fame, before the mogul status, before the empire. Janice Combs was not always a woman of means. She was a young widow from Harlem, raising her son alone after her husband, Melvin Combs, was gunned down when Sean was just 2 years old. She worked as a model and a teacher's assistant, grinding, surviving, praying. When Sean entered the music world in the early 1990s, Janice was right beside him. She believed in his vision, defended his ambition, and was his loudest cheerleader. But something shifted when Bad Boy Records exploded. The music got louder. The circles grew glitzier. The lifestyle turned darker. "Diddy got bigger than life," one family friend recalled, and she couldn't follow him there. She didn't like what she saw. A former Comb Enterprises staffer remembers Janice crashing a party uninvited sometime in the mid-2000s. She didn't stay long. It was one of those wild nights, scantily clad girls, cameras flashing everywhere. She sat in the corner looking out of place, almost heartbroken. 20 minutes later, she was gone. That moment seemed to mark the beginning of the end of her public presence. She retreated. The whispers started. She didn't approve of the women he surrounded himself with. She questioned how he treated them. She once told a friend, "This lifestyle is going to destroy him. It's not who he was raised to be," said one source. Even behind closed doors, their bond had frayed. "He provided for her financially," said a former chef at Diddy's Los Angeles estate. "But emotionally, there was a wall. They'd talk, sure, but not about anything real. She'd come over for dinner, never stayed long. It felt like she didn't want to see what he had become." So when Janice finally broke her silence and said, "I warned him," it struck a nerve. Because for those who had been paying attention, it fit. She had seen the signs. She had spoken up. But we don't know what he said in return, because Diddy never addressed his mother's concerns publicly. In interviews, he praised her strength, her sacrifices, her role in his success. But not once did he speak of conflict, of tension, of warning. Now that she's begun to speak, people are asking, is this a final attempt to protect her son from himself, or a desperate effort to step away before the full truth emerges? As the legal battles intensify, the court may not only be asked to judge the man behind the empire, it may be forced to ask what his mother knew and why she chose to stay silent for so long. Behind every mogul is a mythology, and behind that, a mother. Janice Combs was never just a background figure in Diddy's origin story. She was a witness, perhaps the first witness, to a transformation that would captivate, thrill, and eventually disturb the world. And according to sources close to the family, one night in 2003 at a party in Miami changed everything. That night has been whispered about for years. But it wasn't until recently, until that statement, that the whispers began turning into questions, big questions, the kind that don't go away, and the kind that may finally get answers. The night in Miami, a mother's silence, a nation's reckoning. As investigators dig deeper into the web of accusations surrounding Sean Diddy Combs, one long-whispered story has resurfaced with new, damning clarity. A night in Miami, 2 decades ago, where something shifted in Janice Combs, and where the seeds of her silence were quietly planted. According to a former Bad Boy record staffer, Janice was invited to what was then billed as a celebratory weekend at a private estate in South Florida. This wasn't unusual. Diddy often brought family members to high-profile gatherings with artists, producers, and corporate allies. These were more than parties. They were showcases of power. Janice reportedly arrived with a close friend. The scene was decadent. High-security detail, gourmet catering, elite guest lists. But late into the evening, the energy changed. And Janice noticed. Sources say she saw a young woman, barely dressed, visibly shaken, being led down a hallway by 2 assistants. What struck her wasn't just the girl's apparent youth, but her fear. One witness recalls Janice turning to a staffer and asking, "Why does she look scared?" The answer chilled her. "Don't ask questions. Just enjoy the party." Janice didn't. She reportedly left without a word to her son. She didn't wait for the driver arranged by his team. She ordered her own car and vanished from the estate, and from Diddy's events, for good. For years, this incident was relegated to insider whispers, passed along like folklore in the corridors of music industry power. But now, in the wake of Janice's cryptic public statement, a woman who once managed logistics for Combs's events has come forward anonymously, backing the story. If true, Janice Combs may have witnessed one of the earliest public clues pointing toward the pattern of alleged exploitation now under federal investigation. That night, 2003, is being re-examined not as a standalone red flag, but as the first flash of lightning in a storm that would grow to consume a musical empire. The question now, haunting the courtroom. Why didn't she speak up? It's one thing to walk away from a party. It's another thing to stay silent for over 20 years while your son's empire flourished, and the allegations mounted. Many are now grappling with that silence. Was it denial? Fear? Complicity? The answer, according to those familiar with the Combs inner circle, is layered and painfully human. By the mid-2000s, Diddy was no longer just a producer or performer. He was a global brand. He owned record labels, vodka empires, a clothing line, and was a regular on TV and red carpets. Much of Janice's lifestyle, her home in New Jersey, travel expenses, even security, was subsidized by that empire. "She wasn't on staff," said a former accountant familiar with the family's financial records, "but she was on the books." That dependency created an environment where speaking out had consequences. Real ones. legal teams surrounding Combs were notorious for issuing aggressive non-disclosure agreements, deploying defamation threats, and, according to multiple sources, even hiring private investigators to track potential leaks. In 2011, during a particularly turbulent period, a family friend recalls Janice confiding that she had tried to come forward. They made it clear, "If I talk, it ruins everything." They'd sue. That same year, industry whispers claimed Janice was planning to release a memoir. The project vanished without explanation. Insiders now allege that it was legally shut down by Diddy's team. But legal pressure was only part of the grip. Emotional manipulation played its own role. A therapist who once counseled a former Combs employee described a toxic environment built on guilt and control. He would remind people who paid their bills, who gave them a life, that power is almost impossible to resist. For Janice, that power came with deeper psychological weight. This wasn't a distant employer, it was her son. She'd watched him rise from a Harlem teenager to an industry tycoon. To admit now, even to herself, that he had hurt people, that he may have become a predator, was to confront an unbearable truth. Something had gone terribly wrong in the boy she raised. And so she remained silent. Not out of malice, but out of paralysis, out of fear, out of sorrow, until everything changed. The breaking point, Cassie's testimony. On the fourth day of Cassie Ventura's harrowing courtroom testimony, the tension inside the federal courthouse was suffocating. Every bench was filled. Reporters scribbled down notes in silence. Prosecutors moved with laser focus, preparing to present years' worth of evidence. Surveillance footage, text messages, medical records. A timeline that overlapped, almost perfectly, with the years Janice Combs disappeared from the public eye. And then, it happened. The moment that didn't just crack the courtroom, but cracked a mother's silence. Cassie, calm and deliberate, testified under oath that Sean Combs controlled nearly every aspect of her life, her medication, her phone calls, her friendships. He dictated what she wore, where she slept, who she was allowed to speak to. But it was what came next that forced the courtroom and the world to stop breathing. She described what Diddy allegedly called freak-offs, drug-fueled sex parties involving escorts, cameras, and coercion. She described feeling trapped, paralyzed by fear. And then she said something no one expected. She said she saw Janice. According to Cassie, it was a night in Miami, a house party. Music was loud, security was tight, girls were everywhere. And in the middle of it, quiet, watching, was Janice Combs. Cassie didn't accuse her of participating. She didn't say Janice helped orchestrate anything. She only said what she remembered. That Janice stood there, that she saw the girls, and that she said nothing. The courtroom went silent. No murmurs, no shuffling of papers, just a collective, chilling stillness. Janice wasn't in the room, but her name now echoed inside it like a bell. And outside, it spread like wildfire. That evening, long after court had adjourned and the media scrambled to process what they had just heard, something else happened. Janice Combs broke down. According to a legal source familiar with the situation, she called her attorney sobbing, not angry, not indignant, defeated. "I can't keep pretending," she reportedly said. "This is too much." She didn't deny Cassie's claim. She didn't attempt to defend herself. She didn't argue about context or misunderstanding. She collapsed. And from that collapse came the moment the world would finally hear from her. 2 days later, Janice Combs released a public statement. It was short, quietly worded, but within it were the lines that would trigger a national debate on complicity, motherhood, and moral reckoning. "I warned him. I begged him, but he wouldn't stop." The world read those words. Analysts dissected them. Victims under gag orders whispered about them. Former employees, publicists, friends of the family, all started revisiting that fateful night in Miami. And just like that, Janice Combs was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a witness, a possible key to unlocking the darkest parts of the case. And to some, a symbol of the cost of silence. Her journey wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about awakening, about breaking free of the shame that had chained her for years. Because when Cassie looked out into that courtroom and said, "She saw us," Janice's world stopped, and for the first time in 20 years, she didn't look away. Now, federal prosecutors are revisiting every moment from that Miami house party. They're contacting former staffers, re-interviewing assistants, reviewing surveillance logs. Because if Cassie's memory is accurate, and Janice was there, that moment could become the cornerstone of a conspiracy case. It may prove that the pattern started earlier than anyone thought, and that someone inside, someone who loved him, saw it happening and walked away. The question now is no longer just, what did Diddy do? It's, what did Janice see, and why didn't she speak sooner? Her reasons may be deeply human. Fear, denial, loyalty. But in the eyes of the law, and in the hearts of the public, those reasons no longer shield her. Because once silence becomes protection, it becomes participation. And now, as prosecutors weigh whether to formally subpoena her testimony, one thing is clear: the dam has broken. And the first fracture, the first break in the empire, was not a lawsuit, not a headline, not a press conference. It was a mother's voice, finally spoken, finally heard. Would you like the next segment to focus on Janice's legal strategy moving forward, how the deposition might unfold, or the broader implications this has for other families entangled in similar high-profile abuse scandals? The woman recalls Janice standing silently by a window, watching the comings and goings of luxury cars and VIPs, while music pulsed through the estate. She looked disconnected. And when she saw that girl, scared, led down the hallway. That was it. That was the last straw. Janice reportedly whispered to her companion, "I shouldn't have come." She didn't wait for her son. She didn't look for him. She left. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just gone. And from that night forward, Janice Combs stopped showing up. To insiders, her absence at Diddy's events wasn't merely noticed. It was noted. Her once consistent presence at awards, shows, album launches, and after-parties dried up almost overnight. "She was always there," said a former tour manager. And then suddenly, nothing. Like she'd vanished from the picture. Now, with Janice's cryptic statement, "I warned him. I begged him." But he wouldn't stop. Those who were there that night are reevaluating everything they saw, everything they heard, and everything they ignored. One former assistant recalled how, years later, she overheard a conversation between Janice and one of Diddy's longtime business partners. She said something like, "I saw it once, that was enough. You people live in denial." It was cold, final. Like she'd made peace with staying away, but not with what she'd seen. The power of what she didn't say. In courtrooms, silence is often interpreted in two ways, as protection or as guilt. And in the case of Janice Combs, prosecutors are beginning to argue it may have been both. She wasn't just a bystander, said one federal investigator. She was his mother. She had access no one else did. If she saw something, and we believe she did, then the question becomes, what did she do with that knowledge? The legal team for Diddy remains tight-lipped, offering no comment on Janice's role. But behind closed doors, sources confirm that the Department of Justice is considering her as a possible corroborative witness under seal. If Janice agrees to testify, even in a private deposition, she could validate key claims made by accusers, particularly those related to the early patterns of fear, coercion, and control that now define the federal case. And her motivation? According to one family source, It's not revenge, it's grief. She loved him. She still loves him. But she can't carry the silence anymore. The cost of silence. This case is no longer just about what happened in penthouses, tour buses, or private islands. It's about something far more unsettling. The systems of protection built around powerful men, and the people, family, friends, colleagues, who stay silent to keep the machine running. And in that silence, victims fall. Janice Combs' story is forcing the public to confront an ugly truth. Even love, even loyalty, can become forms of complicity. Because if a mother sees a girl afraid, sees something dark, and turns away, what hope do assistants, housekeepers, or young artists have? Her journal, her words, her walkout from that Miami estate, they all paint the portrait of a woman who knew. Not everything. Not all at once. But enough. Enough to make a difference. Enough to ask questions. Enough to say something. Before it was too late. And now, 20 years later, that moment may finally come. The night that changed everything. If the 2003 party truly marked the beginning, then Janice Combs may have borne witness to the very first public warning sign in a story that would spiral into a federal investigation. What once seemed like a mother's quiet discomfort at a lavish industry party is now being re-examined, not as an isolated red flag, but as the first lightning strike in a storm that would eventually shatter a music dynasty. But now, the question echoing through the courtroom isn't about what Diddy did. It's about what Janice didn't do. Why didn't she speak up? Walking out of a party is one thing. Staying silent for 2 decades while your son's empire grows and rumors of abuse gather force is something else entirely. And that silence, it's haunting everyone involved. Denial? Fear? Complicity? According to multiple insiders who've spent time inside the Combs circle, the answer is complex and profoundly human. By the mid-2000s, Sean Combs wasn't just a rap mogul, he was a global brand. His name was on vodka bottles, luxury clothes, fragrance campaigns, and multi-million-dollar real estate deals. He graced red carpets, dominated magazine covers, and hosted private parties that drew everyone from Wall Street elites to Grammy winners. Janice Combs was not just the mother of a celebrity, she was financially tied to his kingdom. Her New Jersey home? Covered. Her travel and security? Covered. Her quiet, comfortable life? Made possible by her son's success. She wasn't technically on the payroll, said a former accountant familiar with the family's finances. But make no mistake, she was on the books. That dependency created a fragile dynamic, one where silence became survival. And behind the scenes, Diddy's legal team wasn't known for patience. Sources describe a culture of fear, powered by ruthless attorneys and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Lawsuits were threatened liberally. Private investigators were allegedly used to monitor leaks. People didn't speak up because they couldn't, at least not without risking everything. In 2011, a particularly volatile year for Diddy, a family friend remembers Janice trying to push back. She told me, "I thought about speaking up. I really did. But they warned me, if I talk, I destroy everything. They'll come after me." That same year, there were whispers that Janice was preparing a memoir, a tell-all. But the project vanished, quietly, legally, and entirely. Industry insiders now claim that Diddy's team killed the manuscript before a single page reached a publisher. Whether with threats, money, or both, they buried her voice. But the legal tactics were just part of it. The emotional grip was even stronger. Diddy didn't just fund his mother's life. He reminded her of it. He would tell people, straight up, "You owe me," said a therapist who once worked with a former employee of Combs Enterprises. He created a web of guilt and loyalty. For some, it felt like love. For others, it was control. For Janice, that control had a name: motherhood. She wasn't protecting a CEO, she was protecting her child. The boy she'd raised alone in Harlem after her husband was gunned down. The boy she'd prayed for, worked 3 jobs for, sacrificed for. To admit, even to herself, that he had become the very thing she feared most. That was a truth too painful to hold. So she didn't. She buried it. She rationalized. She hoped the rumors were wrong, that the headlines were exaggerated, that the women were mistaken. She told herself that if something truly awful were happening, she'd know. And if she didn't know, maybe it wasn't her fault. But deep down, Janice Combs knew something was wrong. And when the lawsuits started, when the victims came forward, when the truth began to take shape, everything changed. The silence that had once been her shield became her burden. And now, with journal entries in evidence, a sealed deposition on record, and her own words haunting every headline, Janice is no longer an accessory to silence. She's becoming a witness to it. Janice Combs, conocida por su silencio, emitió una breve pero poderosa declaración de disculpa en una conferencia privada, admitiendo haber visto y omitido situaciones dañinas relacionadas con su hijo, Diddy. Su confesión generó un cambio en la percepción pública y reabrió preguntas clave en el juicio, impulsando nuevas investigaciones. Aunque no enfrenta cargos, su cooperación con las autoridades podría convertirse en el eje moral del caso. Su momento de rendición no fue escandaloso, sino profundamente humano. Her official statement, "I warned him, I begged him, but he wouldn't stop," was not only a bombshell, it was a fracture line running through the heart of the defense, and perhaps through her own legacy. Because Janice Combs, whether willingly or not, now holds the potential to become one of the most important witnesses in the trial. Federal prosecutors are reportedly weighing the possibility of sealed testimony. Legal analysts speculate that she could become a turning key witness, a phrase used in complex cases to describe someone whose inside knowledge has the power to unlock a broader pattern of abuse, coercion, and cover-up. The emotional weight of Janice's transition, from protective silence to reluctant truth-teller, has triggered a national conversation not only about what Diddy is alleged to have done, but about the social scaffolding that allowed it to continue for so long. It's a conversation about the mothers who stay quiet, the insiders who look away, and the industry that cloaks itself in glamour while hiding monsters in plain sight. The fallout beyond the courtroom. The reaction outside the courthouse has been visceral. Activists, fans, fellow entertainers, and survivors of abuse have flooded social media, radio shows, and news outlets. Some express anger, betrayal, even heartbreak. Others, empathy. "She's still a mother," one prominent therapist said on MSNBC. "What we're witnessing isn't just legal exposure, it's generational trauma surfacing in real time." The entertainment world is watching nervously. Combs's empire spans decades, shaped trends, and influenced global pop culture. But now, like so many fallen idols before him, the legacy is being re-examined under a microscope, and Janice's role in his orbit is no longer off-limits. Already, Diddy's former collaborators are distancing themselves. Brands are re-evaluating partnerships. Former friends are issuing statements of non-involvement. But the most haunting silence now is Janice's. Because she hasn't spoken again since that statement. A mother's burden or a witness's duty. It's unclear what Janice will do next. Some believe she may try to retreat again, to fold herself back into the shadows. But others argue that the moment has passed for silence. "Once you've said, 'I begged him to stop,' you've crossed a threshold," one legal expert told The Atlantic. "You've opened the door not just to scrutiny, but to obligation." There's also talk of immunity negotiations, sealed depositions, and the possibility that Janice could become part of a broader investigation into who enabled the culture around Combs. Her testimony, even behind closed doors, could corroborate witness accounts, or reveal details about efforts to silence accusers. The moral complexity of Janice's story is undeniable. She is both victim and enabler, both protector and potential whistleblower. Her journey speaks to the broader truths at play in this trial, that behind every predator, there may be a network of silence held together by fear, loyalty, and denial. And now, the world waits. The courtroom will move on. More witnesses will testify. Evidence will be examined. Cross-examinations will unfold. Verdicts will be debated. But Janice Combs's decision, whether she speaks again or not, will continue to shape the narrative in ways that transcend the walls of federal court. Because this is no longer just a trial about a celebrity mogul. This is a reckoning about power, about truth, about who sees, who speaks, and who finally refuses to stay silent. And in that reckoning, Janice Combs may yet become the voice that shatters not only her son's carefully built world, but the silence of an entire industry.